Tonight, I bring you 5 special dogman encounters that were shared with me. From finding the supposed dogman den to seeing a deer being torn to shreds in front of you. These are 5 horrifying encounters with what can only be described as a living werewolf. Close your windows and lock your doors. They're out there and they're coming for you. Grew up on the West Coast, got engaged and moved my butt to the East Coast for my woman, and we've been living in New York City for quite some time now. She's an avid fan of the outdoors and loves to camp overall. I'm not really a huge outdoor guy myself, but since being with my wife, I've gotten out of my shell a lot more and have grown appreciation for it. One of my wife's favorite places to go check out is Shelter Island. It's actually next to Long Island, and the only way you can really access it is through a ferry. The best thing about the island is the Mashomack Preserve. It's 2,000 plus acres of swamp and forest with some cool little trails to hike around on. The problem is the wife and I have had some not so great experiences there with unknown animals in the area. That's the only really way I can think of what to call it. The first time was when my wife and I were still dating. This would have been back in 2014. This would have been our second or third time hanging out, and we were on one of the trails, and we had an encounter with one of these strange animals. It was in the afternoon, and we were a ways into the hike, and this humongous black wolf jumps out into the path, looks over in our direction, and leaps into the brush. I honestly thought it was a dire wolf just because of the size of this thing. I mean, it was practically the size of a moose. I don't think it's possible for wolves to live here, let alone on the preserve, but I'm not entirely sure. From what I remember, it just looked like a giant black wolf, and I didn't notice much out of place. It did have a bit of a longer snout though, and its eyes were a sharp, sharp yellow. It only glanced over at us for a second in acknowledgement that we were coming up the path. As soon as it happened to me and my girlfriend, we were just like, "Whoa, did you see that?" We were more amazed than anything else, and so we continued our hike. Now, I've talked to her family. They're also all very outdoorsy people, and they said there's no known wolves in the state of New York that they're aware of. They thought it was rather interesting that we had a supposed run-in with a larger-than-life wolf. It was the following summer in 2015 that her uncle, who's also an avid hunter, wanted to join us on a few of our hikes into the Mashomack Preserve. He had come with us at least 5 or so times since we went there a whole lot, and we had a whole lot of fun seeing the sights and doing all sorts of different hikes and whatnot. At this point, we had kind of all forgotten about the previous year's encounter with the large wolf. This particular time, we had come to a clearing in our hiking, and this clearing not only had marshes, but was kind of swampy, and you could actually see the coastline. My wife's uncle spotted something in the distance, a large black mass moving. It looked like a huge animal. We were hundreds of feet away from whatever it was, but we could tell that it was on all fours, and as black as any animal I could have ever seen. It was quite the unsettling sight. My wife and her uncle are more familiar with the wildlife in the area. I know there's all sorts of animals, and there's white-tailed deer, but I can't imagine what animal this is. We were watching it for some time before it started moving in our direction, which we all thought was rather strange. We watched intently, not sure what it was going to do. It was clearly going in our direction, and to the right of this openness was the coastline being just a bit further, and to the left of this thing was the forest. All of a sudden, this thing stops coming toward us, and what looks like it stood up on 2 legs and darted off into the woods to its left. We were all baffled at what it could have been. It was still hundreds of feet away when it stood up. It looked like a dog that just decided to stand and had full mobility. I couldn't really make out details just because of the distance, other than it just being a big dark mass that stood up. Maybe it was the wolf we saw last year. I'm not too sure. It darted into the forest so fast though, we had to double take and ask each other where it went off to. I did some researching later on and found out there's such a thing as the Michigan Dogman, but that's pretty far away from here in New York, and so I don't think that's it. I really don't know. Maybe there's some unknown animal roaming the preserve. What do you think? The year is 1989, South Tucson, Arizona. We were professional cave spelunkers, or whatever you call it, but we wanted to trip the caves in October. We heard they were beautiful and wanted to get some pictures. We went in the late afternoon and were told by the locals to be out before sundown. He said it's not safe after dark. A lot of nocturnal animals come out. And lastly, he warned us that because the caves were natural and nothing was fenced or maintained, don't be surprised if you come upon a snake or two. So before we went in, I was already getting nervous. I thought it would be relaxing, but there we were getting all warned and just feeling wary about everything. My friends laughed and told me to ignore the guy. My friend Roger had told me, he is saying that to feel important, let's go. And that was the end of that. It was late afternoon when we went into the caves, but after only a few feet, it got dark as night. Occasionally, after a twist of turn, we could see more light coming in from outside, lighting the way in front of us. We went deeper, and it got colder. I would have had them hold the flashlights as I took some totally awesome pictures of the cave walls. It was beautiful. We got as far down as we dared when we came to a rugged opening. We shined our lights in and could see it drop down and curved around. I think we could squeeze through, Aaron started. You guys want to try it? He finished. We thought about it. It looks like no one has been through here in ages. Probably priceless photos. You guys up for it? He asked. Again, we thought about it. Maybe we should, but I think it's getting dark outside. Maybe animals are going to start roaming around in here, Tracy worried. We pulled our flashlights away and pointed back to the path up, and that was when I noticed the light coming from down below the rugged crevice. Before the guys could turn their lights back on, I told them, "Hold it, hold it." We stood there and looked down at a crack. We saw an orange light flicker down there. "What is that?" I asked. "Oh, that must be the sunset. Must be another," Roger attempted to clarify. All four of us squeezed together and peered down in the hole. And no sooner had we done that than we saw an unmistakable shape of webbed wings. They must have been at least 10 feet across. Then they blurred and swooped in front of the light. And then the light faded. "What the hell was that?" Aaron said. We got out of there. We did not stop for pictures. We did not chat. We just headed for the opening. I know I was more scared with every step. I could just feel something following us in the cave. And then we could hear something running up behind us. At first, it started in the far distance, but you could hear it getting closer. I could hear Aaron's voice shaking when he just told us, "Just keep going." We made it out of the cave and ran to the car, and we all stood there looking back and breathing. The local guy was gone, and no one was around. "I think that guy is just having some fun with us," Roger concluded. And then Aaron pointed back to where we had come. "Do you see that? I see yellow eyes. You see that?" Aaron asked. I saw it. We all began getting in the car. It was then that Aaron pointed his light back up there. Aaron and I saw something like a red alligator skin roll back into the dark. Maybe the local guy was pranking us, but it was a very good and very scary prank. I personally think that was organic life too, to some extent. Something lives in those caves in the Sonoran Desert in Arizona. Back in the winter of 2000, I was driving back late from a long road trip from Indiana back to my place in Tucson, Arizona. It was pretty late at night, and I still had a long ways to go to get home. I was driving the 191 and was somewhere before Burnside. It's pretty desolate out here, and things can get lonely. There's pretty much nothing in either direction, but just more desert. Anyway, I was driving back, and I think it was sometime closer to midnight. There really wasn't any other car on the road at this time, but I ended up seeing lights in the distance. Pretty normal, an oncoming car in the other lane. No biggie. Well, I noticed this car was speeding abnormally. I mean, not just speeding, I mean hauling ass. I know a lot of people like to speed out here, so again, I didn't think too much of it. I noticed that this car was going so fast, the vehicle was beginning to lose control on the road and even began swerving, just trying to stay straight. So, my first instinct is, uh-oh, drunk driver. But as the vehicle approached, I slowed down and pulled closer to the right side of the road. As soon as the car flew past me, and not even a moment later, I don't know what it was, skinwalker, werewolf, monster, mystery creature, whatever the hell you want to call it. Some large, brown, grayish wolf was running, chasing after this vehicle that had just flown right by me. I mean, this thing was hauling ass too, and if I had to guess, at least 60 miles an hour. It didn't seem humanly possible, and I have never seen an animal move so fast. I couldn't even believe my eyes. I had slowed down to almost a full stop just to intake what I was seeing properly. Both the car and this creature went by me so fast, the details were pretty limited. I knew I saw a wolf face and brown grayish fur. It looked really bulky, and it looked like its front arms were much longer and didn't really work on its body. It was strange. I even thought to myself, is there some laboratory around here that this thing escaped from? I didn't see any eye shine or anything, which was weird. After it happened, I picked it up into high gear and I flew down 191 the rest of the way home, just trying to get there as fast as possible. Living in Arizona, I've had quite a few friends over the years, and natives specifically. Some of them Navajo, and I know when I tell them about my encounter, they just tell me it was a skinwalker. I'm just not so sure. I've grown up hearing about skinwalkers being out here, and this just seemed like a roided out wolf running on all fours chasing a car. I guess I'll never know for sure. The year is 1995 in Yuma, Arizona. I have seen some strange and disturbing things in my life. Some when I was serving in the military. Some when I was in the horrible neighborhood where I grew up. Some just because I was with a bad element somewhere. But the scariest thing I have ever seen was that night in the desert. A bunch of us had gone camping in the Arizona desert. It was a perfect night. We were loaded. We had a campfire. We were pumping the jams and just chilling out. I had been drinking like a fish and need to drain the water tanks. I got up and walked north behind a rock formation and leaned up against it and started taking a piss. Just as I am about to finish, I see a glow over the hill. Not a big bright glow, like a UFO or something, but just an almost indiscernible orange flicker. I was about to walk over to the hill and see what was going on when Lawrence stumbled over to take a piss. He started blathering about Wendy, which is one of our friends that he was into. "Oh man, bro, she is so hot. I think she's gonna hang with us the whole entire weekend, dude." He started, "That gives me time to work my magic." I did not respond to his junk. Instead, I pointed out the glow still going on over the hill. "What is that, man?" I asked him. "What?" he asked me. I told him that something was glowing over there. I remember he stopped, looked, swigged his beer, and finished pissing. And then he said, "Oh yeah, let's go have a look." I told him and we started over. As we were walking over, he mumbles, "Probably just a campfire. We're not the only campers out here." I told him probably. And then he whispered, "But we walked about, an hour? I thought Diane said this was private." And I answered quietly, I don't know." Then he started rambling about Wendy. "Damn, how am I supposed to get up with my girl if we got other people rolling up on us like we are in the mall, yo?" Then we got to the top of the knoll and looked down. There was no campfire. There was, however, something that looked like a fire glowing from a hole in the rocks going down into the earth. "What the hell?" Lawrence asked. I have no idea, I told him. Is that a volcano or something? He said. I don't know, I guess it could be, I responded. Should we go look? He asked. Yeah, if it gets too hot, ain't nothing but a thing, I reassured Lawrence. And as we started walking toward the glowing hole in the earth, Lawrence kept repeating nothing but a thing over and over. We started down the embankment and got maybe 30 feet from it when we started to see something coming out of it. Maybe it's like Old Faithful, at Yellowstone, Lawrence started. Every so often it's going to belch out some stuff, he finished. We both stood there, totally mesmerized. Something was coming up out of that hole. At first, it looked like 2 closed golf umbrellas were being pushed out of the hole. And then the umbrellas parted as they pushed farther from the constraints of the tunnel. Then we watched as these 2 horns, like upright ram horns, came out between the umbrellas that looked like they were opening up. Honestly, I think we thought it was some type of wildlife. Neither one of us said anything at first. We were just watching. I think we expected to see hooves in a cow body or something, maybe, or some animals running away from a fire in a cave. I really don't know. I think when a person sees something that they do not make any sense, sometimes all they can do is watch until something clicks. And so we watched the head come out, a human face. This is followed by a long, reptile arms, claws, and fingers. It put its hands on the ground and pushed itself from the hole, and the umbrellas opened up. They were wings, shredded bat wings. No thanks. We took off running. Neither one of us even turned around until we got back to the campfire. We were acting a fool. We were screaming and gasping. Lawrence picked up a rock and shouted, "Let's go!" The car was probably a 45-minute walk away, and at first nobody even got up when we showed. I picked up a nearby rock also and stood by Lawrence. We were both hyperventilating. "Go back to the car? I'm not walking all the way back now. That's bull," our friend Darren barked. The girls were confused and stopped drinking their beers long enough to stare at us, then start giggling. "What's going on, you two?" Wendy had asked. "It's the devil. We saw the devil," Lawrence had blurted while backing up. "What?" Darren skeptically said as he got to his feet. "What the hell are you jerk-offs shitting about this time?" Then we heard something crunching in the dark, back from where we just were. Everyone got quiet. "What's going on?" Darren asked. "We saw this thing coming out of a hole," I started. "It's the devil. It came out of a hole in the ground. Straight out of the fire, straight out of hell," Lawrence interrupted. "Probably just saw a freaking Gila monster, you idiot," Darren whispered. "Let's go back to the car," Janine said. And then we hear another crunching sound. "Somebody out there, you better come out now," Darren shouted. "No, man, I'm telling you, you don't know, man," Lawrence pleaded. "That shit is the devil." We all stood there for a moment, just frozen like a group of mannequins in a department store display, waiting. That's when we heard the whooshing sound. Then the girls started gathering their stuff. Winnie picked up her jacket and the flashlight, and Janine grabbed the sleeping bag and the cooler. Then Darren began reaching for his pack when we were all shocked by this boulder dropping from out of the sky and smashing our campfire out. There were screams, gasps, and all that. Then the flashlights came on and Lawrence ran off into the dark, toward where he apparently thought the car was, while the ashes drifted to the ground. We could hear something swooping over us. The girls were navigating the flashlights around, trying to spot it. And then Janine's light fell on some red-black skin flash over the top of us. We took off running. We headed back toward the car. We eventually caught up to Lawrence. We were scared and gasping for air and treading sand. We started talking, which helped to calm us down. Darren tried to remain logical, which also helped, I think. He was telling us that it could be just some kind of big desert bat. Wendy said something about maybe it was protecting its babies or something. Then Darren started talking about animals being territorial. Then I saw Darren flinch.
Something had hit him. I asked him if he was okay, and he told me, "Never mind, just keep going." Then something smacked Janine. She screamed and started brushing off her shoulders. We started jogging. Then I see something fall on Wendy in front of me, like sticks. She jumps and screams, and then Lawrence is screaming. Then I'm being pelted with something. The flashlight are being wheeled around, and then I hear, "Snakes!" Snakes were falling out of the night sky above us. I saw Darren pull back his leg and shine down the flashlight. I caught sight of this twisting pile of rattlers. I did not know if they were Mojave rattlers or sidewinders, and none of us stuck around to find out. We all just ran through the dark crying and waving our hands, jumping as we went. We finally get back to the car, and I was asking anyone if they were bit. Janine asked pathetically, "Is there a hospital nearby?" I had no idea if there was, but I knew if anyone had been bit by a Mojave and immediately ran for 15 minutes afterward, they would probably be dead in the next 10 minutes. But all I really knew was we had to get in the car and get the hell out of there. We stumbled down the slope together, where the cars was, when we saw this thing, a big thing, drop from the sky on the other side of the car. We all stopped. The thing crawled up on top of the car and squatted there. It was a terrifying sight to behold. It opened its wings up and stood up. You could see its horns and wings. Lawrence started praying. He was calling to Jesus and asking for mercy. I remember I swallowed hard. The thing made a loud and long clicking sound and then flew off into the night sky. We made it to the car. No one had been bitten, thankfully, and I never drove through the desert ever again.
My brother has always been a pretty avid hunter. Me, not so much. My brother also grew up a lot different than I did. We have the same dad, but after I was born, my dad and my mom split up, and I went to go live with my dad in the city, while my older brother lived out in the country with my mom. They had a pretty disastrous divorce, and so I actually didn't get to see my older brother for quite some years. It was terrible, I know. My mom lived out in the country and remarried a man who happened to be one of the best trackers in the area. My older brother was still young at the time, so he learned well. He's in his older 30s now and is a great bow hunter. He's been hunting for most of his life, and he has ran across every situation you could possibly come across. Or so we both thought. I actually try and go camping with him more and more now, just because he's a wealth of information to be around, especially while you're out in the woods with him. He recently opened up to me, though, about an encounter he had with a creature he can't quite explain. My brother is a pretty stern, atheistic, doesn't believe in nothing kind of guy. If it's not flesh and blood in front of his face, it don't exist. You know what I mean? My brother is not the type of guy to make up stories. He has too much of a reputation to withhold in his small circle of trackers and hunting friends, and has nothing to gain from making silly stuff up. Anyway, this is what he relayed to me. He was out bow hunting some white-tailed deer in October, and he came across a big old buck at about 20 yards away, which is great. He happened to sneak up on it, and it somehow didn't hear him. He really had the upper hand, and somehow this buck hadn't noticed him at all. Right as my brother began to draw his bow, this buck immediately lifted its head up and turned its attention to the left. This is where my brother begins to have a harder time telling the story. He gets pale, nervous, and you can tell he's pretty shaken up recalling details. This scares me because you can tell he's genuinely terrified about what transpired. He goes on to tell me this. Somewhere out in the woods, somewhere around 40 to 50 yards to my 10 o'clock, comes this giant black blur that leaps onto this buck quicker than he could blink his eyes and just starts tearing this buck to pieces. He said it looked like an overly sized canine that was more ripped than a bodybuilder, just tearing into this buck, ripping it to shreds and gore. He sat there behind a tree just watching for a few moments as this animal literally was reduced to a pile of guts. As the creature was feasting, its back was to my brother. My brother was so scared at this point, he knew it was time to bail and get out of there as fast as possible. But before he could, the thing that was eating this pile of what was ever left immediately stuck its head up in the air and began sniffing before quickly turning around to face my brother. It's like it spotted him and knew he was there. Even though my brother is great at hiding and he was pretty cleverly tucked away out of the open. My brother tells me that he pissed his pants right there on the spot out of sheer terror as this hulking werewolf creature was standing not even 20 yards away from him. Covered in gore and blood of the buck it just mutilated, this thing is staring right at him and begins to slowly and menacingly growl and show its teeth. He said the thing that got him the most was how intelligent this thing was. He said its eyes looked like they had deep intelligence in them. It wasn't just a wild animal he was dealing with. He said the eyes were terrifying in their own right and they were a glowing amber color. But he just said the beast looked evil, like it was right out of a movie. My brother slowly began to back up and this thing just kept looking at him. He eventually backed slowly out of view enough to run back to his truck. He told me the number one thing you should never do in face of any predator is to turn and run, because that just invites them to give chase. That's their predatory instinct. He's so glad his hunting common sense didn't fail him in the moment, because he's certain he would be dead. I asked him if he thinks it was a werewolf or just an animal, and he just tells me it was too evil and intelligent to be either of those things. He just tells me if demons existed, that was one in the living flesh. He still goes out hunting and doing whatever it is he does, but he's definitely developed a sleeping disorder from it and has trauma that he's still dealing with from the whole ordeal. I love exploring the woods. I always have. Ever since I was a kid, just going out by myself and venturing off and finding all sorts of cool stuff. It's always the best. I found so many great things as a kid. I found bones. I've even found an arrowhead one time as a kid in Oklahoma. I thought that was pretty cool. I remember when I was a teenager, I came across some really cool bones that actually looked human, but it just turned out to be elk bones. However, even though I've had some fun finds here and there, it was nothing really serious. Nothing will ever beat the day I found the den of what I believe to be the Michigan Dogman. It was terrifying, but so exhilarating. This was in winter of 2010. I was working in Danbury, Wisconsin at a plant with a buddy whose dad helped me get the job. Now, what's great about Wisconsin and the surrounding states is all the areas of just beauty and places to hike and go explore. I know people say the Great Northwest is beautiful, but they need to come out here, especially around Danbury. Even in the wintertime, nature still has its beauty, and that needs to be appreciated. Some friends of mine think I'm nuts, but I just love going on my days off and walking miles and miles into the woods just to explore. Today was no different. Out here, you don't have to go very far to find wilderness to explore. This day, I had driven out to the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest to hike and adventure for the day. I had everything I needed with me: snacks, food, flashlight, emergency kit, all my backpack, extra hoodie, you name it. This was November and things up here are freezing. It wasn't going to be stopping me though. No, we actually didn't even have snow yet where I was, so it was perfect. I hiked quite a ways in. I remember I had been going for at least 4 hours when I ran into more of a clearing of an area. This area had what I noticed to be in it a ravine, and at the bottom of the ravine was what looked like the entrance to a cave. It wasn't huge, big enough for a person to fit through, but getting down this ravine was a little tough. It was slick, rough, and steep. I had to sit on my butt and slide down a lot of it, but I did it in the name of adventure and exploration, so I did what I had to. I made it to the entrance of the cave in just a few minutes of sliding down on my butt, all across the sharp rocks and dead brush. I was a little banged up, but I was okay. I realized now that the entrance hole was bigger than I thought. Holy shit, I thought to myself. I just stumbled upon a bear den. Talk about the ultimate adventure thrill. I decided to quickly pull up my flashlight and investigate. I may love hiking, but I am nowhere near a wildlife expert. I know bears hibernate, and I could potentially run into a sleeping bear. I'm crazy, and that was a risk I was willing to take. Now, I've gone spelunking before, and for those of you who don't know about spelunking, it's also known as caving, and it's one of the funnest experiences you'll ever have. Just so people out there don't think I was entirely retarded for doing this. Luckily, I have a really high quality flashlight with fresh batteries, and this thing was bright. The entrance was kind of sloped. The slope that I just came down on my butt continued into this cave entrance and looked like it opened up more once you slid down a little more ways in. I would say maybe 20 feet at most. I shone my light in and slid down. I reached the bottom in only seconds as it was pretty muddy. As soon as I slid into the cave, the most overwhelming wet dog smell engulfed me. I practically gagged, it was so strong. While holding my nose, I shone my light around, and it was a decent-sized cavern that looked like it continued on for a bit. Now, I started to feel a bit nervous because I didn't think that a bear's den would reek like a dog. As I began to unplug my nostrils and get used to the smell, I started to recognize another smell that was a little bit more faint over the overpowering dog smell. Blood. I knew right then I was in the den of a predator, and I should probably leave. I at least wanted to see where this chamber went off to, so I climbed over some of the rocks just so I can get a better look at the tunnel entrance to the next chamber. As soon as I climbed over the pile of rocks, at the bottom of the entrance I just came through, there were bones literally everywhere. I don't think I've seen so many bones in one place in my life. To answer your question, no, I didn't see any human skulls, but there were so many deer skulls and animal bones scattered around. This couldn't be good. As I shone my light across all the bones that lay in front of me, I gasped pretty loudly, and I must have gasped loud enough because as soon as that happened, I started hearing rustling noise from the next chamber, which wasn't far away. I immediately started panicking and convinced myself I woke up a hibernating bear and I was in trouble. It just sounded like rustling, but I heard it coming towards the chamber I was in. I turned around and bolted my way down the entrance so fast, I climbed up that slope like someone had a fire underneath my ass, and eventually made it back to the top of the slope. I was filthy, muddy, and banged up, and was certain I had just entered an unwelcome den. Unfortunately, I was still 4 or so hours away from my car. It was a long and nervous hike back to my vehicle. I was hoping that I did not disturb some animal that was going to find me in the woods and come get me. I'm just not sure it was a bear. I just keep thinking back, why would a bear's den smell like a wet dog? I can't get over that. I've convinced myself it had to be a dog man. It's creepy too because the cave I found wasn't really easy to get to, and it's miles and miles in the middle of the forest. It was only by chance I happened to stumble by and see it. Although even though it was fall and there was a lot of mud, I didn't recall seeing any footprints of bear or dog anywhere between the top of the slope and the entrance of the cave. Anyway, that's my encounter. Make of it what you will, and I no longer will wander into random caves and won't be as risky next time around.
It was 1982 in Yuma, Arizona. My friend Rick and I were passing through Amarillo at sunset on the way to California from Chicago. On the second day, we were taking the 40 west over to the 8th south, then down to Yuma. It cuts through a great deal of empty land, inhospitable desert, but beautiful views. Though strangely, I felt nervous. Don't get me wrong, the sky was spectacular. The sunset a brilliant orange, red, pink across the wide open plain. But as the stars began to come out, all I could see was a solitary 2-lane highway going through the heart of nowhere. It was breathtaking, it was gorgeous, but something made me anxious about it. Maybe everyone gets anxious in desolation, I don't know. We were driving in the dark, unlighted, essentially abandoned Interstate 4. We had gas, we had food, but the wide open sky over the wide open desert made me feel so tiny. We were listening to tapes, so our music was good enough, but the driving was monotonous. We were trying to make it to Yuma and had left Phoenix about an hour and a half ago, traveling alongside Interstate 8, and then that was when I saw it. We had gotten lost, twisted around and on the highway, and apparently missed the off-ramp to Yuma. We wanted to stop there for gas and food and stretch our legs, so as I fiddled with the map, Rick pulled off the shoulder off the road, and the car suddenly fell on the passenger side. "Uh-oh," I said. "Shoot, I hope you didn't ground us into the desert sand." Rick then pulled the car forward, still along the shoulder, so we knew we were okay. I gave Rick the map and got out. It was night now, that deep purple clear desert kind of night. I could see the twinkling light of Yuma in the distance, or at least that is what I think it was. Then Rick got out of the car, opened a can of Coke and said, "We'll get there all right." He was confident though, I not so much. I felt more like we might spend all of our gas looking for an exit. Rick walked a ways from the car, and then I hear him taking a leak. I looked back away from the car, in the opposite direction of where the twinkling lights of Yuma were. I looked back over the desperate loneliness of Interstate 8. No other cars. And beyond that, the stoic outline of the rock formations of the Sonoran Desert stretching out beneath the full moon on a mystic desert night. As I turned to head back to the car, my eyes caught sight of something unbelievable. I stopped and looked back. There it was, sitting on a nearby rock formation. Near the top was a clear outline of the profile of a gargoyle, just like on a Gothic church, you know, like the ones you see on the old churches in Europe. It was beautiful, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world, that someone would carve that intricate beauty into the rock, and at such a nondescript place. What a wonderful vision on a lonely highway in the deep desert in the middle of the night. I stood there nodding my head. I really loved that vision, until it spread its wings and flew up into the night. Everything immediately after that was a blur. I was screaming. I was running back to the car. I grabbed Rick, and Rick did not believe me. And then Rick saw it flying in circles under the moon and directly over the top of us. We got in the car, and Rick drove like a psychopath. Then we see something swoop just over the windshield. There was no mistaking the giant bat wings. "Did you see that?" I shouted. "I saw it," Rick answered. "It's a giant bat," I reassured him, and myself. "You think?" he reassured me, and I himself. "Yeah, that's what it was," I told him. Then something sideswiped us from the dark. The car went into a powerful slide and off into the sand. The car stopped. It turned off because it was still in gear. Rick started it up again, and the wheels were spinning. We got out to see what was going on. "Not too bad," I told Rick. "Okay, push, I'll drop it into gear." He quickly ordered, then jumped back into the car. We were rocking, then fortunately rolled back on the road. He idled the car in neutral and got the flashlight out of the glove box. Rick clicks it on and hands it to me. The car did not have air conditioning, so the windows were down. "Just keep it in hand if we see that thing again. Shine it," Rick told me. But before we can roll, a giant shadow drops down by the passenger window where I was sitting. My reflex was to immediately shine the flashlight I was holding at it. The flashlight fell on this yellow-eyed, leather-faced, boiling red, devil-horned gargoyle. "What the?" Rick shouted. All I did was scream, "Drive, drive, drive now!" We drove past Yuma, and we made it to Los Angeles. Something, to this day, still lives in that desert. The year was 1992, south of Tucson, Arizona. I like to explore the caves around Tucson. I would usually go alone because I did not like whiners and hated being rushed. It's an acquired taste, I guess. I could spend the whole weekend just hiking and caving. It was a Friday in the hot, hot summer. I took my ATV out and dropped it near the caves, right around sunset. And what a sunset it was, a gigantic orange ball across the baked desert. Classic. I took out my camera and began taking pictures of the massive orange circle. That was when I saw it. At first I thought it was an illusion. You know, a trick of light. It happens in the desert because the heat, well, heat like that, with the heat waves in the air, you get these ripples or dimples that look like this or that. I rubbed my eyes and looked away and looked back, but it was still there. I saw these tremendous wings, like California condor-sized wings. They were flapping in huge swaths. I thought it was strange because it did not seem to move like a vulture or a large bird. Something was different about it. Then, as it got closer to me, I could make out peaks on the wings, like a bat has, and I thought, no, that can't be. I considered maybe it was some kind of genetically mutated fruit bat. The sun was not dipping behind the horizon yet, so the sky was getting darker, but still it was too bright for me to be staring very long into the sun without getting phased out. I looked away, then looked back, and sure enough, this thing was still there and getting closer, bigger. I lifted the camera and just began snapping pictures. I was hoping, even with the sunlight or twilight combination, I can get something on film. The sun continued to fade, but the bat started hovering in place. Then, as the last of the sun began to fade and twilight began to take over, the bat began lowering straight down in place. That was when I saw a body, like a human-shaped body, drop as it hovered to the desert floor. I watched while the light faded on this thing as it set down on the ground about 100 yards away. It stood for a moment, then appeared to close its wings and dive into the sand. Literally into the sand. As the last of the sunlight disappeared, the bat thing disappeared into the desert floor like a mole. I thought perhaps there had been a crevice there obscured by sand. Maybe it went to one of the bat caves there? I considered getting an ATV and rolling over there to get a picture of a world record bat, but I could not really be sure what I saw and did not know what I might stumble into. I started back down the rocks when I heard a shriek like a cat coming from the caves underneath. The sound was a wailing which got louder as I slowly pioneered my way down. After about 10 steps, I hear this screeching sound coming from the crevice directly underneath me. I could not have been more than 15 feet away. I did not know what it was, but it did not sound happy. I only had a knife with me and did not know what I may stumble upon. So I decided to wait. Basically, I planned to hide in place and wait for this thing to pass, or reveal itself at some point. I heard this rattling, clicking sound draw a few feet away from me in the gap there. I was scared. I waited. After about 5 minutes, I heard nothing anymore, so the light fell on this breathtaking lizard face. It had yellow eyes and horns like a big horned sheep. It snorted at me and then leaned forward like a snake. I ran. Then all of a sudden, I am flying through the air, and I must have went up about 10 to 20 feet and was dropped on the ground. I got up and ran right into a heavy cactus combo. I knew I was bleeding when I jumped on the ATV and tore out of there, and as I drove away, I passed that thing. It was already in front of me, looking down from atop the cave opening. I remained there, squatted with its wings folded behind it as I drove me.
My story takes place back in 1971 in the spring with my cousin and I. My cousin was a full-time mechanic and happened to be great at fixing up cars and flipping them. A guy brought a cherry red 68 Dodge Charger into him with a blown up tranny, told my cousin if he could fix it and find out what's wrong with it, it was his. Cousin eventually ended up getting it fixed, and so here my cousin is, rolling up to my house in his almost new 68 Charger. I lived in rural Wisconsin at the time, so he would come to see me every so often. Me and my cousin loved cars, so he would drive out to me, and we always would go for joyrides in his Charger, just around the countryside. Looking back, those were the times. One day though, we were driving around having a nice little joyride when my cousin decides to pull over on the side of the road. Now, we're in the middle of nowhere. It's a 2-lane road, no cars anywhere around. There's nothing but fields and pastures all around us. We're entirely alone. My cousin pulls out a black leather bag out of his glove compartment and opens it up. It was full of doobies. He pulls out one, and I remember very vividly him putting it to his mouth and then feeling around his pockets and swear because he forgot matches. He asked me to check underneath the passenger seat to see if maybe he had dropped some down there. I remember as I was reaching down under the seat, I just happened to look out to my right in one of the fields, and I see this large animal, or what looked to be a large animal, huddled up in the grass. I quickly brushed it off as a black bear, probably, since that's honestly what it looked like from some distance away. I found some matches under the seat that he had dropped and handed them to my cousin, who at this point was more than ecstatic about my find. I looked back over just out of curiosity, and I see this animal, what I thought to be a black bear, standing up. It was tall. As my cousin was lighting up his joint, I pointed it out to him and said, "That's a huge black bear," and he looked. What's weird is that this black bear looked strange. We were looking at it from behind, and it was quite a ways out from us, but it looked more canine from behind, which my cousin and I thought was odd. My cousin was handing me the joint, and before I could take a puff from it, this animal we're watching turns around in full and faces us suddenly. As I'm blowing out smoke, I see this thing start to walk toward our vehicle. It was then that my cousin and I began to really panic. As soon as it turned around and started walking in our direction, we couldn't tell it wasn't a black bear at all. It looked like a big black dog standing on its hind legs. It was really hairy and shaggy, and it was just jet black. It had a dog head on it and not a bear's. Within just seconds of processing what we were seeing, it was locked in on us, picking up its pace dramatically. It was going to be right at our car in less than 20 seconds at the rate and size of its strides. My cousin swears, throws his joint out the window, and floors the car in a drive. We took off so fast we left tread marks and smoke on the road. We never looked back in the rearview mirror, but we were both like, "What in the hell was that thing?" Neither of us have ever seen anything like it out here, let alone period. We were quite a ways out from where I lived, maybe 7 or 8 miles away, on a more desolate road, but I didn't even know those kinds of animals lived out here. I'm not sure what it was, but it was big, and we were freaked out a little that it was going to come and attack the car, or even us. My cousin's convinced it was just some huge black bear that got mad we encroached on its territory, or maybe it even had cubs around that we couldn't see. I don't think it was black bears though, and I don't think black bears even run on 2 legs, do they?